this is working for me, it's not happening to me, it's happening for me, so it's like, how is this? But it took me a while to release a lot of that anger and that resentment. And I'm like, no, everything happens for a reason, so I'm going to find out what this reason is.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Oh my God.
How are
How's it
you?
going? I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
That's good. Oh, this is amazing. And are you comfy? Are you in a good spot? Ready to just
Yes,
chat?
absolutely.
Okay.
I'm
Sounds
in.
Yeah. Okay, nice. And I remember the first time that we talked, and it was in the car when we were going for lunch at the first Reiki training.
Yes, that Pelican Pier.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we were chatting, and I remember learning from you like that you have this crazy like past with like all this spiritual stuff, and how you kind of tried to stuff it for a while and then it came back and you're like, okay, I guess I better not stuff it. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well, because the thing was like, because like growing up, I was always like, like I used to read a lot, right? And
okay.
then I'd be like, and then once you know better, you have to do better, right? So
Yes.
it's like, I was 21 and I was in Europe, and
Mhm.
and those are the best times of your life where you're exploring, and
Yeah.
being in the UK, alcohol is a big part of things as well, and just
Right. Yeah.
experiencing my freedom. I was like, I'm going to hit my spirituality, just hit the snooze button on it for a little bit, and I'll pick this up later.
Exactly. That's smart. I did the opposite where I was like a Puritan from too young to remember all the way till I was like 21, and I had never drank because I was like, nope, I don't want to drink. I don't. And it wasn't even religious. It was just my own, like, I don't know, just discipline in my life, you know?
Yeah.
I remember being like, I went to an evangelical university
Okay.
and saw all these people that they made you sign I won't drink and I won't dance contract.
I
Like,
won't dance.
no dancing. Yeah.
Why?
I don't know, maybe moving your body is, and not to like diss that, but it was intense. I was like, and then it hit me that like that's what I was self-imposing on myself. And when I
Mm,
saw it from the outside, I was like, I don't, I don't agree with that. I don't want to do that, you know?
yeah.
It's so rigid like that. And yeah, the dancing, I don't know, maybe moving your body is
Maybe, I don't know. It's
the,
interesting because like moving your body is absolutely part of like number one self-care and shifting the energy, right?
yes, yeah, it's
Which
true.
is interesting. That's why it's like, why? And that's why I think with the current times of isolation and all the rest of that, we've become very stagnant.
Yes,
So like movement is important, right?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Okay, at that same time, because it was a shift, right? It was like me seeing myself mirrored through this institution and then going, whoa, I actually don't believe that or believe in that, because it was like, and I signed it. And then that's when I started drinking and dancing, right? It's like, sure, let me go out and actually do that. But honestly, it links to what you were saying because I was in a drama class. One of my options, I was like, okay, I'll take acting 101,
Yeah.
which was really fun. And the instructor had us, sit on the stage and then do all these movement exercises.
Hmm.
I remember the first time we did it, I almost passed out because my body was so stagnant. She had us like just kind of like folding like a yoga stuff, like
Yeah.
to get your breath going or whatever. And I remember almost passing out where I was seeing stars and all this.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And I think it was that much stagnancy locked in because I had had that back injury at age 15, and but probably all the mindset, it's all connected. So I
Yeah.
was like this locked up, rigid being,
Yeah.
and was like, what? Like I'm gonna fall over here.
Yeah, that's crazy. But it's also understanding kind of like, and that's what I like go through life is kind of like, what limitations have I
Mm,
placed on myself, right?
yeah.
And that's a big thing because we create our own. I strongly believe that we create our own realities, right?
Yeah.
So what are the limitations that we've placed within ourselves? That is kind of like the important thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, which is so interesting. And I think that's this year, that's my mission, is to kind of like identify what are the limitations I've placed, or what are the limitations that I'm seeing physically, mentally, emotionally, and like shifting through those, because those I think are very important. But it's funny because as soon as you said, oh, I signed a contract, like my heart was like, oh, Akashic Records, there's an energetic field to that somewhere. We need to shift that. But it was funny because it was the catalyst to actually activate your rebellious side.
Out of it. Exactly. It's true. That's so funny. Yes. And that brings me back to one of our conversations, because you told me that you had become a minister.
Yes.
To be able to do weddings, right?
Yes. So I did a training, and one more week of an extended training was I could become an ordained minister. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. Why not? It's just one more week. And I had a friend of mine who was out in Ontario, and she was an event planner, and she did weddings, and she's like, you so totally have to do this.
Yeah.
And it's funny because as soon as I did that, because like their licensing was BC, Alberta, and Ontario, and she used to work out in Ontario, and I was like, okay. So, and I was like, oh, I wonder how this, like signing a contract, like what happens energetically, right? Once you sign that. And it was so funny because like I only did 2 weddings. One was a second marriage out in Ontario, and then the second one it was actually the first gay couple to ever get married in Alberta when it was illegal. So the newspapers had shown up. And obviously they didn't get it legalized, but they took pictures, only not of their faces because it would have been incriminating.
I actually remember that. Yeah.
But on their 25th wedding anniversary, I officiated that wedding. And I was like, and then something within me went, okay, I'm done, because, and that's so interesting that, because I was like, maybe those were the only 2, but what freaked me out about the first wedding is that, as I said, my friend was a wedding planner, and she said, oh, that's interesting because people behave differently around you when you're in capacity of minister. And I was like, what? And I was like, why? Because like, like I'm nobody to judge anyone, but then that, and intuitively I got a hit there, like, oh, it's because you hold that vibrational frequency of kind of like that connection to God, that, I don't know, truth all of a sudden. And I was like, yeah, but we've all got a connection. We've all got our own connection, and I was just like, and that was interesting that just having that label shifted everything for the people around me. And the other thing that I also noticed is having past life experiences. Every time I got an email, okay, dear Reverend Natasha, I was just like, oh, and I was like, how ironic for all the lifetimes that I got killed for being kind of like intuitive and mystical and magical and, all the rest of this, to be part of the Chartered Institute of like Metaphysical Ministry as a representative. I was like, that is kind of bizarre. So I had to do some work around that to release that, because it's not, spirituality is not religion, it's part of it. And I was like, okay, I understand that, but perhaps it was just the 2 that I needed to do. And a lot of my students are like, no, if I ever get married, you need to marry me. And I was like, maybe we'll do a different kind of ceremony.
Right. Which I actually want to go into that with you, because like, what is the answer? And I don't know, personally, I'm like, is the answer just understanding what it is in terms of that contract? And if it's like till death do us part, that is a dissolving of it, but knowingly entering that rather than like forever and all eternity. And then you spend lifetimes trying to get out of those cycles almost, right? I don't know.
Absolutely. And I found, like, I have seen both cases. It
Okay.
all depends on what the intention is when you like when you get married, right?
Yeah.
So for example, and then subconsciously we start doing weird things as well, because we're tied to that contract. So, if we do it till death do us part,
Mm-hmm.
and that is kind of like word,
Mm-hmm.
then sometimes when, say, the relationship is not going well, I sometimes start seeing one person start becoming ill into that kind of like
Mm-hmm.
heading towards that, kind of like that word. That's why our words are so powerful. And in the second marriage, that wedding that I did, because we took a lot of the traditional kind of, they wanted the traditional vows, but there was a lot of subserviency. And I'm like, I'm not saying that. I'm not, because I know that those words carry
Matter.
weight,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And forever is a long time because the soul does not die when the physical body dies. So that makes it very, very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
right? But so I actually gave up, I allowed that license to lapse because I feel that relationships are shifting.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then the other thing that I noticed as well is that once somebody officially gets married,
Mm-hmm.
it changes the vibrational frequency of the relationship in the sense that you're bound by a third party. So you end up becoming, from two people, you become three. And the third person is the government, because there is
Mm-hmm.
that registration. They become kind of like, in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
part of the marriage, the union. So
Yeah.
it's, you go from a unity to a trinity in a way. Is like, do you really want to be into that? And I think, and it's so funny that that has come up, but like, I think relationships are shifting. People are looking at relationships in a very different way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
It's so interesting because even the whole part of like, okay, if it's a sacrament, then it's you two and God, right? But then the whole idea that the church stood on behalf of God, but then the church also has to file under the government or whatever. So I agree with what you're saying. There's a lineage of contracts that are going on in that, where I know it's shifting because it's like, for me, it's like, what's sacred? And do
Yeah.
you want a sacredness to enter? Sure.
Yes.
True, good, and beautiful and unconditionally love, related, not if it's linked to all these contracts that's this history of humanity.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Wait.
even then, looking into like how women change their names, and it was so that you knew
Yeah.
who you belonged to. And as that dynamic shifts as well, other things shift too.
Yeah.
You know?
It's true. I had a numerologist tell me also, she was doing my numerology, which takes your name, your birth date, whatever. But she literally said, if people get married, they have to come back and get theirs redone. And she said, why do you think most marriages, like, or not most, sorry. She said, why do you think many marriages will divorce within the first, I forget how many years, but it was short. And she's like, if the vibration doesn't align with you, even in terms of your numerology changing, it's like you go, what the heck, who am I now? And you got to face that. So yeah, it made me think. I'm like, oh, so true. Like changing your name, entering that contract.
Our names have like powerful, powerful kind
Mm-hmm.
of like vibrational frequencies, because it's that essence actually
Mm-hmm.
makes part of who we are, just like our astrological, numerological stripes, as you were saying. So
Mm-hmm.
it's actually quite fascinating how that changes. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I remember I had a resistance in kind of like shifting my name as well.
Mm-hmm.
And funnily enough, my brother, he actually, so being Portuguese, we get given our mother's maiden name and our father's name, and then when you marry, you just add on another name, so we end up having like tons of names. But
Right.
my brother wanted to keep my mom's maiden name for
Okay.
his children, so he double barreled his name as well, so that would also change that vibrational frequency.
Right. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Did you notice when you changed yours? And because you were obviously aware of it, did it fit?
Well, no, I was still in the
Oh,
snooze, right? So I was just like, but I knew that there was this kind of like subconscious kind of like knowing that that's going to change, right?
okay.
And then like everything, it's what your outlook is and how you take that on, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but more importantly, I had this student of mine, and she was opening up a business, and we looked into the frequency of, and she had printed, business cards and everything, and her business was just not, like, just wasn't going anywhere. And then we were like, oh, we did an Akashic session, and it was like, you need to put it in your maiden name. And literally within 2 weeks,
Yeah.
like, started getting so busy. It was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
And I've had it another one where I had a lady who was pregnant, and she had a name for her son picked out, and her life was literally turned upside down. She was getting sued. There was like business was going crazy, all sorts of stuff like that. And then we're like, no, you need to change the name of the baby to something else. And as soon as she changed it, everything calmed.
Weird.
Everything calmed. Yeah.
So interesting, because so much of the time we're not aware that, like, hey, there's this whole other realm going on at the same time as we're just in this one, right?
Yeah.
Going, why is there a shitstorm around me? And it's like, it's okay. It's not necessarily your fault. It's just that, like, openness to, like, let's look into this. What kind of, oh, it's so cool.
It is. It's, you know what? We always say connect to our inner child. And for me, it's always connecting to the curiosity. So it's going, oh, why have I called this shitstorm towards me? Like, what am I to learn? How does this expand me? How is this working for me? Because a lot of the times we get kind of brought into the thought of, oh, this is all happening to me. And it's like, no, how is this happening for me? Because I've obviously called it. If we believe that we are completely empowering, drawing towards us all the lessons that we need to learn, we've obviously drawn this towards us, right? So it's like, oh, why have I done this? Kind of like, what am I? And this I knew as a child, because like I went through kind of like, I had like single mom growing up in South Africa. She didn't speak English. There was a massive Portuguese community. So she never really needed it. But then when she got divorced, I was just like, okay, Natasha, you have to kind of like step up and do this. So there was a lot of kind of like life tribulations that came up at that time. But I always remember thinking to myself, what is the situation coming to teach me, is what I used to think. And then I'd like just sit with it almost now that I think about it, in a meditative state. And then it would be like, oh, that's what I'm to learn from this. And then as soon as I learned from that, the situation seemed to kind of like dissipate, and we would shift into the next. And now later on, doing more kind of like learning and everything, after I stopped hitting the snooze button, I realized that it is that point of meditation and kind of like going within and understanding. And it's true that once the lesson is learned, it needs not exist anymore. And that's why it dissipates.
It dissolves. Yeah. Truly, when we change, the external changes, and it makes no logical sense. It's literally just oh, I don't need that anymore. Where is it? What happened? It's gone. Oh, cool. Like, that's really real, right?
Yeah.
Wow. That's brilliant.
And I think the last 2 years has started to help us to release, because it's helped us to go within and actually really look at what is it that we want. Who do we want to hang out with? What do we want to eat? Things like that. So it's quite interesting in that perspective.
Totally. Oh my God, I have so many things, and I feel like the train's going so fast. I'm like, I want to jump on this car.
Good.
One of the things, just as you're saying that, it's so true, where I'm on this tangent of like, okay, if the leadership is less present or something, we're seeing like voids in terms of who to trust then, right? Like, it's kind of ambiguous. And it's like, even that is saying, hey, if you don't have someone telling you what to do, how are you actually being? Because that's real, right? When nobody's hovering over your shoulder saying, study, do this, make sure you're doing that. How are you living?
Yeah.
And that's genuine, right? It's like, oh, that's on me. Like how I show up's on me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So absolutely. And that's how my mom, okay, and I'm going to do this to my children as well. So I was very rebellious, and well, my teen years were awesome. I was just pushing boundaries and all sorts of stuff. But my mom knew this, and she knew that the more she tried to control, the worse it would be, right?
Yeah.
So what she did say was exactly that. She's like, okay, I've given you the basis, the morals. I've given you everything that you need to be an adult. So from this moment on, whatever you do is on you, because you know what's right and you know what's wrong. You cannot blame your parents. This is on you. And then that was kind of like that little voice of conscience kind of like sitting behind going, yeah, I can't blame anyone. I have to take responsibility for my actions, because it's true though, right? She's like, giving you all the basis, I've given you the morals, the morality, I'm directly translating, to face every situation. Now it's up to you how you act. And you can never blame me, because I've given you the basis. And I was like, damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. I know, because it's that accountability, and it's like, what? I can't blame someone. But if we never get that handed to us, tell me what you think about this. If we don't ever get our what's it called? Autonomy, responsibility handed to us, we just translate the parent that'll hang over us to the boss, the government, the God figure, right? I talk to kids about that. Like, what's your idea of God? Is God this authoritarian with a wagging finger? Because that's like pretty interesting, It's like,
but that's what we've been led to believe, right? It's that fear controls us.
Right. Yeah. Right. And maybe there's something to it where we never got told, okay, you have your lessons, now it's on you, where you're like, oh, like I'm responsible. It's not someone's fault. Yeah. Oh, this was another thing. I think that in order to look at this happens for you, not to you.
Yeah.
I feel like there has to be a spiritual understanding to some level, because it's not as direct as I got abused, but it was for me. It's like, no. That's too right. It's like, no, spiritually, like in a bigger picture, how did you call that in to resolve? And we're at a stage where it's like, you might be resolving ancestral stuff, not necessarily your own. Do you agree with that? Or what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Absolutely. But yeah. And on another spiritual essence, like, and that's true. I get asked a lot, like, why would I choose? Because if you look at the Akashic, we create our blueprint for this journey while we're here. Okay. So we call in, we ask our parents to be born, full well knowing what we're going to be born into. And the possibilities and the probabilities. So a lot of the times we're like, okay, back to those relationships, saying, okay, I just split up from my partner after the child being born for like a year or 2 or 3 or 5. It's knowing that child came in knowing that would be a possibility or a probability. Because when we create our blueprint, we create every possibility, every probability based on every single decision at every single moment of every single day.
Right.
That changes our trajectory. So, and that's all created. And coming back to that is like, why would I choose to be born into an abusive cycle? And a lot of the times we choose that to overcome it, to stop it, and then help others. Because as we shift as a collective, we need to change these patterns.
Right.
But what happens is we go through those kind of like waters of forgetfulness. And when we're here, sometimes we have that pull, because it's part of our mission, like to kind of like go, no, I'm not going to be anything like my parents. Right. And that shifts the whole dynamic for the generations to come. But sometimes those souls are the catalysts for change.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why they chose to go through that. Because what happens is that when we suffer a trauma or something, there's a vibrational frequency that sits with us. It's part of who we are.
Yeah.
And we attract other people with similar traumas, which is why you'll notice, like when you do a group setting, there will be something that ties the group together, and it's coming together for that healing. And if you look at it from a perspective of healers and doctors, whatever it is, whether it's practitioners, natural practitioners, or Western practitioners, there will be a match. That's why we gel with some people and others we don't, is there is a vibrational frequency match. So a lot of the times is, the soul did choose to go through it, and some souls, and those are the souls that need more love, not less love, is that they've chosen a journey that many would not be able to endure for the sake of kind of like releasing that somehow.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, my teacher, and she talks about this in class, like she was born into a sexually abusive family, and where she was abused by her father, but she chose that in a sense of bringing in forgiveness to that lineage, in a sense of understanding, in a sense of healing herself, and then helping so many other women that were, abused, whether by family members, husbands, other people. And, it kind of like defined who she is in this world. And that was the journey she chose. And now she's helped so many, but she wouldn't have been able to have a reference point or an understanding what those people had been through if she had not been in it in herself. So it is hard to first understand, and it's not condoning it. It's not saying, oh, your soul chose, accepting it in kind of like, oh, your soul chose to be born, so now I'm going to abuse you. No, that's that person's karma.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it kind of like becomes so interesting. It gives nobody an excuse to be mean to somebody else, but it's also understanding that, okay, yes, we've chosen this for some reason.
Right. Which goes back to the curiosity, because it's like, if we chose it on a spiritual level, it always has to be that qualifier, because it's like on a physical level, no, nobody chooses hit me now, like, no, right? No. So, but then the curiosity, why am I showing up as the abuser in this person's life? Why am I showing up as the victim in this person's life? Because we're in the dance of creation, right? The dance of, and you're right, the people who chose the toughest journeys did so as like that, okay, I'll try to shift, and maybe we shift it a few degrees, but the next generations will shift it that many more, right? Like, it doesn't mean you have to shift the entire thing, but maybe you going through that is shifting the entire thing, right?
Absolutely. And looking at those kind of like stories of people that had nothing and made themselves into something,
right?
They needed to experience the nothing to become something.
Yeah.
Their soul chose that. That's what drove them.
Yeah.
Right. So then that is the beauty within that as well. So it's you're right. It's all about, let's just get curious. Right. Like, how is this working?
Right. I know, it's true. And going back to the kind of like the structures and whatnot, I remember going through years and years as a female in a learning the doctrine of the church, right? I'm Catholic, so it was like Catholicism to the nth degree, right? And being kind of the other, right? Because I wasn't male. I couldn't climb that hierarchy. I couldn't ever put the collar on where people then go, vibrationally, you're different, right? Which is a soul decision I learned now. I can look back now and go, oh, wow. Like, because it was being like a little bit of the renegade in that way, right? Oh, let me be female and go through all of this and do all the training and all the like, whatever. Well, and I do have stories like, while being looked down on. Who are you to even speak? Who are you to, kind of like, without it being anyone intentionally probably, but that was the vibe. Like, and it's like, I know I'm the underdog. I have nothing to lose here. Let's question, let's get really curious. Let's start to unpack and debunk some of the things that aren't serving us anymore, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of what we're going through at the moment worldwide, is because it's putting pressures on all our systems.
Yes. Yeah.
Education, finance, relationships, health systems, everything is being pressure tested at the moment
Yeah.
because what worked in the past no longer works
Right.
moving forward. And if you think about it, we've had 2 years to go within.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it doesn't come at, I don't believe in coincidences, that we're shifting very much from a Piscean masculine energy of structure, of discipline, which the pendulum always tends to swing too far, to one of the age of Aquarius, where we're more nurturing, which is more feminine. So it's the nurturing, the intuition, the spontaneous, the radical, the creative aspect. And we've given that 2 years, like I'm talking in general, I'm generalizing, in society, to go within, to do our work, to release, to nurture ourselves, to look at what do we want for a work-life balance, to look at, is this something I want in my life, to carry on working this 9 to 5, getting home, watching Netflix, having dinner, watching more TV, going back to sleep, rinse and repeat. It created a lot of stagnation. And when we go through big changes like this, humanity as a collective, we shift. I mean, think about it. The United Nations was created after a world war. We came together, right? So it's kind of like there's so much that is happening at the moment, so many changes, so many shifts, but it really is about looking within and going, okay, what is going on with me? Because we're a micro representative of what's happening on the outer world, right? So, and that's why they say, if you want to see the change, you need to become the change. It starts with us. And that's some of the messages that have been coming through, be the love that you want to see. And going back, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. So back to those people that have abused, there also needs to be an understanding that happy, loving, compassionate people that have had amazing lives do not abuse others. Right. And usually a lot of and again, no excuse for harming or hurting anyone, but there needs to be an understanding that people usually treat us, one, how they've been treated, so you see who they are, but two, how we allow them to treat us as well is the other story as well. So again, taking that responsibility in that sense of, no, you don't treat me like that, kind of a thing.
That is so important, especially when we start to shift into feminine energies, because the feminine flows, and it's like to contain water is a little difficult. It's just going to go until there's an edge, right? So how are we allowing our masculine energy that we all have within us to be that container, so we don't just spew onto everywhere, we don't just become doormats, we don't just allow for, because you're right, the pendulum will swing a little too far, and we have to be aware that, like, no, like my thoughts, but tell me what you think. We're not moving into a matriarchy. We're not moving into the feminine overpowering the masculine. No, we got to take what we've learned that's good and balance it. Yeah. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, we all have masculine and feminine energy within us. Okay. And sometimes we need to, a lot of people talk, okay, it needs to be balanced. No, sometimes we need to be more masculine in the sense of we need to take action. We need to create more process at certain points of our lives. And other times we need to be more feminine, where we need to kind of like be creative and spontaneous and nurturing. So yes, there is balance, but sometimes we need to lean one way or the other, right? So it's not enough to just think positive, which is feminine. We need to action positive so that the world around us changes. So that's how it works in balance with each other in that sense, right? I don't know, that's my opinion at least, but that's what it is. Yeah, sometimes. So for example, if you're starting a business, a lot of the times you need to take action, right? That's very masculine. So you need to be more in that kind of like, but then not too much of that, because then you need to bring balance into the self-care aspect, which is the nurturing, so that you can move through life. But it's also in that space of kind of like water is an amazing example, because we're in the flow of things, right? and we have to release control. Control is masculine.
Yeah.
Being
Yeah.
in flow is feminine, but again, bringing that balance into it, right?
Yes, 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 yes. Oh my God. The amount of times I've had the analogy come to me of like how much I cling to the side of like, it's like, okay, I'm in the flow, right? As you're like gripping a death grip to the side and the water's flowing past you, like, yeah, I'm in it, right? And it's like, no, you're clinging to the side as all this flow goes around you. And I remember being like, oh, I'm not an energy leech, but I would attach to other people's energies. I can feel you flowing, therefore I'm in the flow too, or something, right? And it's like, okay, that was like a good start. You like dipped your toe in, and like whatever. But then it's like, what does it mean to actually release to and be in your own flow?
Absolutely.
Flow of the universe, whatever you want to call it. And it's you're right. It's a release of control. Ooh.
Release of control. So the other thing is kind of like, so I also use a similar analogy in the sense that I say, when you go to those water parks and you go into those water slides, what's happening? You're just holding onto the side and all the water behind you is just holding. And then you realize that, wait a minute, if I just let go, I might actually enjoy this.
Yes. Right? Oh my God, it's true. And it's like, but that goes back to the trauma. It's like, I might actually enjoy this, except last time the tidal wave hit me and I was head over heels for however long and I didn't know, or we have those spiritual death and rebirths, right? It killed me inside. But I think part of that is like, but are you dead? No, you're still here. So that tumble, or, it's like, well, I went over the rocks. Okay, you're still here. We got to heal those scrapes and whatnot. So yeah, is it always fun? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I don't know. It's true because the thing is it's true. It's looking at those, but looking back and going, okay. So, and it's like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is the other thing that happened. Like, that you look at it and you go, okay, it's within the shadow aspect of us that there is the most growth, which is interesting to also understand that, right? And a lot of the times we suppress everything because things need to look a certain way.
Oh.
So we need to be strong, and crying means you're weak and vulnerable, but we're starting to realize that no, we're starting to feel our feelings like 100% as we move through that. And sometimes we do need to kind of like change direction, because a lot of the times is when we do hurt ourselves or we do have an accident, it kind of like brings that perspective of kind of like, what am I doing? What direction am I going in? And perhaps ending up on the side of the rocks is because we need to change direction or shift trajectory because it's not in alignment with who we are.
Yeah.
That's why sometimes as well things happen or people come into place. It is to kind of like give you a different perspective. And again, we've called this.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example.
Okay.
When I first came over here, it was quite hard, even though I managed teams in Europe in the capacity of marketing. Being in a very oil and gas industry, they were like, oh, you have no oil and gas experience. And I'm like, yeah, but a product's a product. Like,
right. Yeah.
kind of a thing. I don't understand that. So, and I ended up, I did eventually get hired. I had to intern as well for a little bit, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And then I worked my way back up, but it got very, very toxic in that space. And I broke my leg. I was playing, I thought, I joined a mums and pups, bottom of the league, softball league, like non-competitive. And I think like the fourth game or the fifth game, it was in March and it was drizzly, and I ended up bailing. I broke from first to second base. And I broke my leg.
Oh no.
I slipped, and like because of the rain, and my leg went one way and I went the other, and you could actually hear that. And I was like, please let that be the second base person catching the ball and not my leg. And I realized it was my leg.
No.
So I broke it in 5 places. So, okay, we're going over the rocks right now, right? Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I had drawn that towards me because I had just been told to, like, you just push through, you persevere, nothing stopped you. You keep going, and there was this whole thing. So my health was starting to be affected, and then I subconsciously draw that towards me because I wasn't even off for 6 weeks. I was off for 6 months. Like they had to put a plate in my leg and drill 5 screws into my leg, right? And it was because, and if we start kind of like looking things at another layer, when we hurt our limbs is because of a resistance to continuing going on the same direction that we were in.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And that's when I started back onto my not only physically, mentally, and emotionally healing journey, which then allowed me to kind of like leave corporate.
Right.
Not anything wrong with corporate, because corporate is like there's different fits for different people. Mm-hmm. But for me, I went through this kind of like self-healing journey, and then I went, no, wait a minute, I want to help others. So completely, I needed to hit that rock in order to decide which direction I was going in, because it wasn't in the direction that my soul was calling towards. Right. So it was kind of like, okay, these people you've placed in your life to make it really, really difficult to continue on in this path. So they become the rocks or the pebbles that we need to maneuver through. Yeah. Right. Yes. So I could totally understand that analogy. And again, this is working for me, it's not happening to me. It's happening for me, so it's like, how is this? But it took me a while. It took me a while to release a lot of that anger and that resentment towards like the bully, and all those other things, because after I left there, a lot of the people was still kind of like, man, I wish he was still here. And I'm like, no, everything happens for a reason. So I'm going to find out what this reason is, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Still the flow. Yeah. Staying in that flow.
Yeah. But it's just kind of like, we hit those rocks sometimes, but it's to help us change course. Sometimes it helps us to slow down and kind of like go, okay, what am I doing here? What direction do I want to go in? Do I continue on with that flow or not? Right? Kind of like, again, I can relate it back to what's happening at the moment. It's like, we can never go back to what it was. What it was no longer is there. So let's create the future we choose to create.
Yes.
Right? Let's improve on all these systems. Now we know where they're stressed. Let's improve on it. What does a new world look like?
Right. It's so true. Yeah. And that leads, as you were talking, I was also knowing that in my life, the second that I got hit by the tidal wave or went over the rocks or whatever, I agree with you, it redirects. But then I realized, okay, now I get to put checks and balances in place. If it is a stop on the side of the river called chiropractic care, spiritual betterment, and all, I look in my life and I'm like, the amount of people who have stepped up to aid me to healing is mind blowing, right? It's just like, here, there, and everywhere, because that's what we're worthy of. That's what we're actually worthy of healing, but we have to release. And I remember at times being like, but who am I to be going to a chiropractor 5 times a week because the injury was so severe that I had, and being like, not everyone has the means for this or whatever. And it's like, no, the universe provides, you'll find your way as you release to that and go. And it's that vulnerability. I just went over some rocks, and the amount of people are like, holy, this will help you heal. I know, or come, it's part of the journey then, not this sucks to be you. We're all over here in the floaty area. Yeah. It's like, no, we're all in together in that sense. Right.
Absolutely.
I know what you said too about your trauma then helps others once you heal from it. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's important because that is why there is reference. And it's funny because I did a retreat a few years ago at a pyramid just out here in Pincher Creek, and there was a lady who was moving through. I did it with a colleague of mine, David Montgomery, and there was a lady that was going through quite a lot. And I said to her, where you are right now is where I was 5 years ago. And she was like, no. And I'm like, yeah. Right. And she was like, no. And I was like, yeah, I know. And it gave you that understanding. So for example, another example, and not only it encouraged her, but it also reminded me, what it was like to be at that in that space, right? Because we tend to forget. And I think that's the other thing with my spirituality, because a big part of my purpose was to teach people, empower people to reconnect with that aspect of themselves. When I hit the snooze button, I kind of like put like those abilities that I had to sleep. And then when I was ready to kind of like go, okay, I'm ready to step into this, my guides were like, no, you have to work through this. And but that was an incredible, like, again, how is this working for me? Is that now I have a reference point for my students, and I have patience for my students, because now I understand what they're going through, instead of being, because I was so lucky. I grew up in a family that's more into the spirituality, even though we had religion as well, also a Christian. But it was very much kind of like, oh, it's just not, it's a natural ability that has been encouraged all my life. I don't know what it's like to have it stifled, which a lot of people switch that button off at a very young age and forget that they have that. But had I not experienced that struggle of going, okay, I want this back now, and what are the tools that I need to use, or what are the exercises that I need to do, what are the disciplines I need to have in order to get that back, I wouldn't have been able to help my students or have a reference point, because I'd be like, no, this is natural, even though it is.
Right.
This is natural. Why are you not getting it? No, because there is a learning process, and I had to go through it myself. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's so important. What was the learning? Because this came up in a different conversation that I had. So I know there's something here where, what was the learning curve? Like, how did you even begin to start to cultivate that?
So it was interesting, because for me, it started with, okay, my energy systems are blocked. What do I need to do? And I used to know that, like, I was like, yeah, I did hands-on healing as a child. And that's how I got introduced to Reiki, because the Reiki aspect helps to shift the energy. And it became really, really conscious on meditating and working on my chakras, and then going, okay. And then once you start working on your chakras, so for example, my throat chakra was quite blocked, you kind of like start to speak your truth, and you start to stand up for yourself, and you're like, oh my God, how did that happen? Kind of a thing. Whereas before I would have been like, oh, that might annoy somebody. And I'm like, well, maybe that person needs to be annoyed now. It's a trigger for them. Okay, you're welcome. Just like other people are triggers for us. So it's kind of like it's a gift. So that's how I started. I started extreme self-care. It always starts with self, always, whether it's through Reiki, meditation, breath work, whatever it is, it's that connecting back to self. It's that going within. It's what I found has been the solution to, okay, what am I going through? Why am I going through this? How can I move through this? And that's the other thing that is important as well, is that when we are going through healing, feel it 100%, but move past it. Don't get stuck in sitting in that, in that aspect. It's the past. It was crappy. It's got you to where you are now, but if we look at it, the past no longer exists. It's only our memory that keeps us anchored to that.
This makes sense. Or it's, again, maybe the control. I remember one time being like, I went on a walk over this bridge. I looked down at the water because it's really pretty. There's this little pool, and there's a little stick. The stick got stuck, so it's all flowing, and then this little kind of whirlpool area, and this stick is just like, and it was like the moment of truth. I'm like, that's me, right? This, like, again, I'm so used to clinging to the side, being like, I'm flowing, right? And then being like, you let go, but you're still in your little whirlpool of like, but this is all that there is, and this is normal, I guess. And why do I feel like I'm in a washing machine, right? And it's like, because you are, and you got to let go of that, right? And the stick eventually shot out. So it's like, oh, okay, there's hope.
That's awesome. But that is an amazing analogy, right? That is, absolutely. We get stuck on those, and we hold on to those because it's what we know. We've been taught to fear the unknown. We've been taught to try and control everything. And control is a trauma response,
Yeah.
because we know what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And that's the amazing thing about, I know people complain about the millennials, but
Mhm.
each generation comes so apt to change. They don't hold on to anything.
Right.
Always the latest app. I mean, everything has its positives and its negatives, but in that aspect, it's kind of like, because we live in a dual world, which we're shifting away from, but it's kind of like looking at that they don't hold on to anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like, okay, that doesn't work anymore. I'm shifting to this that is more efficient. It's
Yeah.
not kind of like, oh, this is how it's always worked. This is how it's always going to work. No, it's like kind of like, no, let's shift, let's change, let's let go of the past and
Right.
continue to expand and create. And
Yeah.
that's what those people or from that era have come to teach us how to shift.
Yeah.
You'll notice that in the generations. So the older generations, there's a lot more resistance to change than the younger generations, right? And it's because we hold on to the past because apparently it defines us or it makes sense to us. But time only exists in this very moment. So we only have this moment.
Yeah.
And whatever memories we have of the past is anchors that we have to those situations.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the times I say to people, and going through this myself, is what would it feel like if we had no anchors to anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It could just be ourselves moving forward without the limitations, without the traumas. What would it look like, right?
Yeah. And that's where I love that you think that way, because that's how I think too. And working with young people, I remember the shift towards, oh, they've basically had phones since they can walk or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Which there was a turning point, because it was like I didn't have a phone till high school, or if that, and they were flipped, it wasn't what it is today. But anyway, seeing that and being like, okay, what's this teaching us? Because all of a sudden there was this crew of kids that literally, and it was early enough that it was the times when it'd be like in the hall, like, and I was like, in the world that I grew up in, you would never but there was a lot more shame. There was a lot more, just less of that. This is who I am, and this is how I'm here to express. And I remember thinking, because they got a bad rep too, right? Oh, the next generation, that's all, superficial and whatever. And I was like, no, they're here to teach us something. And it's about, they're so aware of this is who I am. Like, I see myself screenshotted in every corner, right? But it's like, okay, so there can be a bad of okay, the world's still out here, and make sure you're present and gaining all those skills of character and all that. But it's also that willingness to change and the willingness to show up and not necessarily look to, I hear you about the anchors of the past, that indoctrination of and it's not all bad. I think it was necessary for us to evolve, right?
Yeah.
But it's how is that serving us? How is that becoming a container for your self-expression rather than an inhibitor? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, even with all those selfies and everything, it's the pendulum.
Right.
Being
Okay.
balanced, right? Like, how far is it going to swing from what kind of being, okay, it's a healthy and kind of this is me without a filter, to, oh my God, I need to step into, this right now, which is very interesting. So and navigating through that. And then now is kind of what does everybody think? And it's
Right. Yeah. True. Yeah. Now we're okay, this is me. And then it's by the way, please be this way, or I don't even know. I don't know about that. But
we're releasing the restrictions and the boundaries of the past, which is amazing in so many ways. And I think that's why there's a lot of resistance to that change.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately we need to be the change we want to see. And the journey, the more I do this, and because I'm doing craniosacral therapy, and all the rest of that, my last cranial level that I did, it was the somata emotional release, is kind of I always knew that we are here to expand who we are.
Yeah.
But I didn't really, I knew it. I didn't know it in my heart. In my heart, I kind of knew it, but I completely understood Like, no, we are really here to work on ourselves because we're the only ones that we can control in that
Right.
aspect. We can't control anyone else. And that is, we're really here as a journey of self-discovery.
Yeah.
Who are by ourselves, and who are we by the people we attract? Because the people we attract are mirrors for us.
Yes. Yeah. That makes sense. And I wanted to share this one thing because I had my session with you in November, I think,
Okay.
or October, something. And I was going through this. I had like cankers in my mouth. I was like really run down. And I remember being to you like, I've done all the healing I can. I've gone down all the paths that I can go down to be like, what's this about? How can I learn from this, etc. And I was like, hey, I'm going to reach out to you because maybe it's in the Akashic somewhere, or which obviously it is. But I was like, okay, I need some help with this. So I remember coming like to the session thinking, okay, thank God I reached out. This is going to be some, lives past and I'm healing this and blah, blah, whatever. And you literally said to me, you've been swimming upstream for way too long. And you're like, and your body's finally telling you that it's exhausted and it can't do this anymore. I'm like, what? It's not some like grandiose, like, oh, and you're past the whatever, it was like, oh, this is a now problem.
It's so funny because like the guides, and I think it's probably a lot part of my personality. It's kind of like, it just is what it is. And it's kind of like, so sometimes they can be quite straightforward. So yeah.
It's perfect. It was perfect. And it was like, so I want to share that because I'm like, when people start to see what I created all of this on a soul level, it can be this, well, then I'm, everything's about, well, everything's from the past and all this stuff. And it's like, that's cool. But there's also, and maybe, at times, sure, but there's also just the here and now. And it's what you just said. Who am I attracting? What's happening in my immediate now that can still be that mirror for me about my own self-exploration and expansion.